Chapter 6 of Book 7 of Eudemian Ethics by Aristotle, translated by J. Solomon. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeffrey Edwards. Chapter 6. The question whether a man is a friend to himself or not requires much inquiry, for some think that every man is above all a friend to himself, and they use this friendship as a canon by which to test his friendship to all other friends. If we look to argument and to the properties usually thought characteristic of friends, then the two kinds of friendship are in some of these respects opposed to one another, but in others alike. For this friendship, that to oneself, is, in a way, friendship by analogy, not absolutely. For loving and being loved requires two separate individuals. Therefore a man is a friend to himself rather in the sense in which we have described the incontinent and continent as willing or unwilling, namely in the sense that the parts of his soul are in a certain relation to each other, and all problems of this sort have a similar explanation, e.g., whether a man can be a friend or enemy to himself, and whether a man can wrong himself. For all these relations require two separate individuals. So far, then, as the soul is two, these relations can in a sense belong to it. So far as these two are not separate, the relations cannot belong to it. By a man's attitude to himself, the other modes of friendship, under which we are accustomed to consider friendship in this discourse, are determined. For a man seems to us a friend who wishes the good, or what he thinks to be such, to some one, not on his own account, but for the sake of that other. Or in another way, if he wishes for another man existence, even if he is not bestowing goods, still less existence, on that other's account, and not on his own, he would seem most of all to be a friend to him. And in yet another manner he would be a friend to him whom he wishes to live with merely for the sake of his company and for no other reason. Thus fathers wish the existence of their sons, but prefer to live with others. Now these various ways of friendship are discordant with one another, for some think they are not loved unless the other wishes them this or that good, some unless their existence or their society is desired. Further, to sorrow with the sorrowing, for no other reason than their sorrow, we shall regard as love, e.g., slaves towards their masters feel grief because their masters when in trouble are cruel to them, not for the sake of the masters themselves. As mothers feel towards their children, and birds that share one another's pains. For the friend wants, if possible, not merely to feel pain along with his friend, but to feel the same pain, e.g., to feel thirsty when he is thirsty, if that were possible, and if not, then to feel a pain as like as possible. The same words are applicable to joy, which, if felt for no other reason than that the other feels joy, is a sign of friendship. Further, we say about friendship such things as that friendship is equality, and true friends a single soul. All such phrases point back to the single individual, for a man wishes good to himself in this fashion. For no one benefits himself for some further reason, or speaks well of himself for a certain consideration, because his action is that of an individual. For he who shows that he loves wishes not to love, but to be thought to love, and wishing the existence above all of the friend, living with him, sharing his joy and his grief, unity of soul with the friend, the impossibility of even living without one another, and the dying together are characteristic of a single individual. For such is the condition of the individual, and he is perhaps company to himself. All these characters, then, we find in the relation of the good man to himself. In the bad man, e.g., the incontinent, there is variance, and for this reason it seems possible for a man to be at enmity with himself. But so far as he is single and indivisible, he is an object of desire to himself. Such is the good man, the man whose friendship is based on virtue. For the wicked man is not one but many, in the same day other than himself and fickle. So that a man's friendship for himself is at bottom friendship towards the good. For because a man is in a sense like himself, single, and good for himself, so far he is a friend and object of desire to himself. And this is natural to man, but the bad man is unnatural. The good man never finds fault with himself at the moment of his act, like the incontinent, nor the later with the earlier man, like the penitent, nor the earlier with the later, like the liar. Generally, if it is necessary to distinguish, as the sophists do, he is related to himself as koriskos to good koriskos. For it is clear that some identical portion of them is good. For when they blame themselves, they kill themselves. But every one seems good to himself. But the man that is good absolutely seeks to be a friend to himself, as has been said, since he has within him two parts which by nature desire to be friends, and which it is impossible to tear apart. Therefore, in the case of man, each is thought to be the friend of himself, but not so with the other animals, e.g. the horse is himself to himself, therefore not a friend. Nor are children till they have attained the power of deliberate choice, for already then the mind is at variance with the appetite. One's friendship to oneself resembles the friendship arising from kinship, for neither bond can be dissolved by one's own power. But even if they quarrel, the kinsmen remain kinsmen, and so the man remains one so long as he lives. The various senses, then, of loving, and how all friendships reduce to the primary kind, is clear from what has been said. Chapter 7. It is appropriate to the inquiry to study agreement of feeling and kindly feeling, for some identify these, and others think they cannot exist apart. Now, kindly feeling is not altogether different from friendship, nor yet the same. For when we distinguish friendship according to its three sorts, kindly feeling is found neither in the friendship of usefulness, nor in that of pleasure. For if one wishes well to the other because that is useful to one, one would be so wishing, not for the object's sake, but for his own. But goodwill seems like to be not for the sake of him who feels the goodwill, but for the sake of him towards whom it is felt. But if goodwill existed in the friendship towards the pleasant, then men would feel goodwill towards things inanimate. So that it is clear that goodwill is concerned with the friendship that depends on character, but goodwill shows itself in merely wishing, friendship in also doing what one wishes. For goodwill is the beginning of friendship. Every friend has goodwill, but not all who have goodwill are friends. He who has goodwill only is like a man at the beginning, and therefore it is the beginning of friendship, not friendship itself. For friends seem to agree in feeling, and those who agree in feeling seem to be friends. Friendly agreement is not about all things, but only about things that may be done by those in agreement, and what relates to their common life. Nor is it agreement merely in thought, or merely in desire, for it is possible to know one thing and desire the opposite, as in the incontinent the motives disagree. Nor if a man agrees with another in deliberate choice, does he necessarily agree in desire. Agreement is only found in the case of good men. At least, bad men, when they choose and desire the same things, harm one another. Agreement, like friendship, does not appear to have a single meaning, but still in its primary and natural form it is morally good, and so the bad cannot agree. The agreement of the bad, when they choose and desire the same things, is something different, and the two parties must so desire the same thing that it is possible for both to get what they desire. For if they desire that which cannot belong to both, they will quarrel, but those in agreement will not quarrel. There is agreement when the two parties make the same choice as to who is to rule, who to be ruled, meaning by the same, not that each one should choose himself, but that both should choose the same person. Agreement is the friendship of fellow citizens. So much, then, about agreement and goodwill. Chapter 8. It is disputed why benefactors are more fond of the benefited than the benefited of their benefactors. The opposite seems to be just. One might suppose it happens from consideration of utility and what is profitable to oneself, for the benefactor has a debt due to him, while the benefited has to repay a debt. This, however, is not all. The reason is partly the general natural principle: activity is more desirable. There is the same relation between the effect and the activity, the benefited being, as it were, an effect or creation of the benefactor. Hence, in animals, their strong feeling for their children, both in begetting them and in preserving them afterwards. And so fathers love their children, and still more mothers, more than they are loved by them. And these again love their own children more than their parents, because nothing is so good as activity. In fact, mothers love more than fathers, because they think the children to be more their own creation. For the amount of work is measured by the difficulty, and the mother suffers more in birth. So much then for friendship towards oneself, and among more than one. Chapter 9. But both justice seems to be a sort of equality, and friendship also involves equality, if the saying is not wrong that love is equality. Now, constitutions are all of them a particular form of justice, for a constitution is a partnership, and every partnership rests on justice, so that whatever be the number of species of friendship, there are the same of justice and partnership. These all border on one another, and the species of one have differences akin to those of the other. But since there is the same relation between soul and body, artisan and tool, and master and slave, between each of these pairs there is no partnership, for they are not two, but the first term in each is one, and the second a part of this one, but not itself one. Nor is the good to be divided between the two, but that of both belongs to the one for the sake of which the pair exists. For the body is the soul's congenital tool, while the slave is, as it were, a part and detachable tool of the master, the tool being a sort of inanimate slave. The other partnerships are a part of the civic partnership, e.g. those of the phratries and priestly colleges, or pecuniary partnerships. All constitutions are found together in the household, both the true and the corrupt forms, for the same thing is true in constitutions as of harmonies. The government of the children by the father is royal, the relation of husband and wife aristocratic, the relation of brothers that of a commonwealth. The corruption of these three are tyranny, oligarchy, and democracy. The forms of justice, then, are also so many in number. But since equality is either numerical or proportional, there will be various species of justice, friendship, and partnership. On numerical equality rests the commonwealth and the friendship of comrades, both being measured by the same standard. On proportional, the aristocratic, which is best, and the royal. For the same thing is not just for the superior and the inferior. What is proportional is just. Such is the friendship between father and child, and the same sort of thing may be seen in partnerships. Chapter 10. We speak of friendships of kinsmen, comrades, partners, the so-called civic friendship. That of kinsmen has more than one species, that of brothers, that of father and sons. There is the friendship based on proportion, as that of the father to his children, and that based on mere number, e.g. that of brothers. For this latter resembles the friendship of comrades, for here too age gives certain privileges. Civic friendship has been established mainly in accordance with utility, For men seem to have come together because each is not sufficient for himself, though they would have come together anyhow for the sake of living in company. Only the civic friendship and its parallel corruption are not merely friendships, but the partnership is that of friends. Other friendships rest on the relation of superiority. The justice belonging to the friendship of those useful to one another is preeminently justice, for it is civic or political justice. The concurrence of the saw and the art that uses it is of another sort, for it is not for some end common to both. It is like instrument and soul, but for the sake of the user. It is true that the tool itself receives attention, and it is just that it should receive it, for its function, that is, for it exists for the sake of its function. And the essence of a gimlet is twofold, but more properly it is its activity, namely, boring. In this class come the body and a slave, as has been said before. To inquire, then, how to behave to a friend is to look for a particular kind of justice, for generally all justice is in relation to a friend. For justice involves a number of individuals who are partners, and the friend is a partner either in family or in one scheme of life. For man is not merely a political, but also a household maintaining animal, and his unions are not, like those of the other animals, confined to certain times, and formed with any chance partner, whether male or female. But in a special sense man is not a lonely being, but has a tendency to partnership with those to whom he is by nature akin. There would then be partnership and a kind of justice, even if there were no state, and the household is a kind of friendship. The relation, indeed, of master and servant is that of an art and its tools, a soul and its body. And these are not friendships, nor forms of justice, but something similar to justice, just as health is not justice, but something similar. But the friendship of man and wife is a friendship based on utility. A partnership, that of father and son, is the same as that of God to man, of the benefactor to the benefited, and in general of the natural ruler to the natural subject. That of brothers to one another is eminently that of comrades, inasmuch as it involves equality. For I was not declared a bastard brother to him, but the same Zeus, my king, was called the father of both of us. For this is the language of men that seek equality. Therefore in the household first we have the sources and springs of friendship, of political organization, and of justice. But since there are three sorts of friendship, based on virtue, utility, and pleasantness respectively, and two varieties of each of these, for each of them may imply either superiority or equality, and the justice involved in these is clear from the debates that have been held on it, in a friendship between superior and inferior the claim for proportion takes different forms, the superior's claim being one for inverse proportion, i.e., as he is to the inferior, so should what he receives from the inferior be to what the inferior receives from him, he being in the position of ruler to subject. If he cannot get that, he demands at least numerical equality. For so it is in the other associations, the two members enjoying an equality sometimes of number, sometimes of ratio. For if they contribute numerically equal sums of money, they divide an equal amount, and by an equal number. If not equal sums, then they divide proportionally. But the inferior inverts this proportion and joins crosswise. But in this way the superior would seem to come off the worse, and friendship and partnership to be a gratuitous burden. Equality must then be restored, and proportion created by some other means, and this means is honour, which by nature belongs to a ruler or god in relation to a subject. The profit and the honour must be equated. But civic friendship is that resting on equality. It is based on utility, and just as cities are friends to one another, so in the like way are citizens. The Athenians no longer know the Megarians, nor do citizens one another when they are no longer useful to one another, and the friendship is merely a temporary one for a particular exchange of goods. There is here, too, the relation of ruler and subject, which is neither the natural relation nor that involved in kingship, but each is ruler and ruled in turn, nor is it either's purpose to act with the free beneficence of a god, but that he may share equally in the good and in the burdensome service. Civic friendship, then, claims to be one based on equality, but of the friendship of utility there are two kinds, the strictly legal and the moral. Civic friendship looks to equality and to the object as sellers and buyers do, hence the proverb, a fixed wage for a friend. When, then, friendship proceeds by contract, it is of the civic and strictly legal kind. But when each of the two parties leaves the return for his services to be fixed by the other, we have the moral friendship, that of comrades. Therefore recrimination is very frequent in this sort of friendship, and the reason is that it is unnatural, for friendships based on utility and based on virtue are different. But these wish to have both together, associating together really for the sake of utility, but representing their friendship as moral, like that of good men. Pretending to trust one another, they make out their friendship to be not merely legal. For in general there are more recriminations in the useful friendship than in either of the other two, for virtue is not given to recrimination, and pleasant friends, having got what they wanted and given what they had, are done with it. But useful friends do not dissolve their association at once, if their relations are not merely legal, but those of comrades. Still, the legal form of useful friendship is free from recrimination. The legal association is dissolved by a money payment, for it measures equality in money. But the moral is dissolved by voluntary consent. Therefore, in some countries, the law forbids lawsuits for voluntary transactions between those who associate thus as friends, and rightly, for good men do not go to law with one another, and such as these have dealings with one another as good men themselves, and dealing with men who can be trusted. In this kind of friendship it is uncertain how either will recriminate on the other, seeing that they trust each other, not in a limited legal way, but on the basis of their characters. It is a further problem on which of two grounds we are to determine what is just, whether by looking to the amount of the service rendered, or to what was its character for the recipient. For, to borrow the language of Theognis, the service may be small to thee, O goddess, but great to me. Or the opposite may happen, as in the saying, this is sport to you, but death to me. Hence, as we have said, come recriminations. For the benefactor claims a return on the ground of having done a great service, because he has done it at the request of the other, or with some other plea of the great value of the benefit to the other's interest, saying nothing about what it was to himself, while the recipient insists on its value to the benefactor, not on its value to himself. Sometimes the receiver inverts the position, insisting how little the benefit has turned out to him, while the doer insists on its great magnitude to him, e.g., if at considerable risk one has benefited another to the extent of a drachma, the one insists on the greatness of the risk, the other on the smallness of the money, just as in the repayment of money, for there the dispute is on this point. The one claims the value of it when it was lent, the other concedes only the value of it now when it is returned, unless they have made an explicit provision in the contract. Civic friendship, then, looks to the agreement and the thing, moral friendship to the purpose. Here, then, we have more truly justice, and a friendly justice. The reason of the quarrel is that moral friendship is more noble, but useful friendship more necessary. Men come then proposing to be moral friends, i.e. friends through virtue, but when some private interest stands in the way, they show clearly they were not so. For the multitude aim at the noble only when they have plenty of everything else, and at noble friendship similarly, so that it is clear what distinctions should be drawn in these matters. If the two are moral friends, we must look to see if the purpose of each is equal, and then nothing more should be claimed by either from the other. But if their friendship is of the useful or civic kind, we must consider what would have been profitable lines for an agreement. And if one declares that they are friends on one basis, but the other on the other, it is not honourable if one ought to do something in return, merely to use fine language, and so too in the other case. But since they have not declared their friendship a moral friendship, some one must be made judge, so that neither cheats the other by a false pretense, and so each must put up with his luck. But that moral friendship is based on purpose is clear, since even if after receiving great benefits one does not repay them through inability, but repays only to the extent of his ability, he acts honourably, and God is satisfied at getting sacrifices as good as our power allows. But a seller of goods will not be satisfied if the buyer says he cannot pay more, nor will a lender of money. Recriminations are common in dissimilar friendships, where action and reaction are not in the same straight line, and it is not easy to see what is just, for it is hard to measure by just this one unit different directions. We find this in the relation of lovers, for there the one pursues the other as the one pleasant person, in order to live with him, while the latter seeks the other at times for his utility. When the love is over, one changes as the other changes. Then they calculate the quid pro quo. Thus Python and Pomenes quarrelled, and so in general do teacher and pupil, for knowledge and money have no common measure. And so Herodicus, the doctor, quarrelled with a patient who paid him only a small fee. Such, too, was the case of the king and the lyre player. The former regarded his associate as pleasant, the latter his as useful. And so the king, when he had to pay, chose to regard himself as an associate of the pleasant kind, and said that just as the player had given him pleasure by singing, so he had given the player pleasure by his promise. But it is clear here too how one should decide. The measurement must be by one measure, only here not by a number, but by a ratio. We must measure by proportion, just as one measures in the associations of citizens. For how is a cobbler to have dealings with a farmer, unless one equates the work of the two by proportion? So too all whose exchanges are not of the same for the same, proportion is the measure, e.g. if the one complains that he has given wisdom, and the other that he has given money, we must measure first the ratio of wisdom to wealth, and then what has been given for each. For if the one gives half of the lesser, and the other does not give even a small fraction of the greater object, it is clear that the latter does injustice. Here too there may be a dispute at the start, if one party pretends they have come together for use, and the other denies this and alleges that they have met from some other kind of friendship. Chapter 11. As regards the good man who is loved for his virtue, we must consider whether we ought to render useful services and help to him, or to one who makes a return and has power. This is the same problem as whether we ought rather to benefit a friend or a virtuous man. For if a man is both virtuous and a friend, there is perhaps no great difficulty, if one does not exaggerate the one quality and minimize the other, making him very much of a friend, but not much of a good man. But in other cases many problems arise, e.g. if the one has been, but will no longer remain so, and the other will be, but is not yet, what he is going to be, or the one was but is not, and the other is but has not been and will not be. But the other is a harder question, for perhaps Euripides is right in saying, a word is your just pay for a word, but a deed for him who has given deeds. And one must not do everything for one's father, but there are some things also one should do for one's mother, though a father is the better of the two. For indeed, even to Zeus we do not sacrifice all things, nor does he have all honours, but only some. Perhaps then there are things which should be rendered to the useful friend, and others to the good one, e.g. because a man gives you food and what is necessary, you need not give him your society. Nor therefore need you give the man to whom you grant your society that which not he but the useful friend gives. Those who doing this give all to the object of their love, when they ought not, are worthless. And the various definitions of friendship that we give in our discourse all belong to friendship in some sense, but not to the same friendship. To the useful friend applies the fact that one wishes what is good for him, and to a benefactor, and in fact to any kind of friend, for this definition does not distinguish the class of friendship. To another we should wish existence, of another we should wish the society. To the friend on the basis of pleasure, sympathy in joy and grief is the proper gift. All these definitions are appropriate to some friendship, but none to a single unique thing, friendship. Hence there are many definitions, and each appears to belong to a single unique thing, viz. Friendship, though really it does not, e.g. the purpose to maintain the friend's existence. For the superior friend and benefactor wishes the existence of that which he has made, and to him who has given one existence one ought to give it in return, but not necessarily one's society. That gift is for the pleasant friend. Some friends wrong one another. They love rather the things than the possessor of them, and so they love the persons much as they choose wine because it is pleasant, or wealth because it is useful, for wealth is more useful than its owner. Therefore the owner is indignant, as if the other had preferred his wealth to him as to something inferior. But the other side complain in turn, for they now look to find in him a good man, when before they looked for one pleasant or useful. End of chapter 11 of book 7. Recording in memory of Mitchell Edwards.